Hi, welcome back to Moms Connect. I'm so glad you're joining us, sticking with us. So far we've discussed at Moms Connect the biblical characters of Sarah, Hagar, and Rebecca. So some amazing things happened in each of their lives, and God really came through for each of them. However, their family lives were a bit of a mess. So the tradition of complicated family relationships continues with more biblical examples of motherhood. So today we're going to take a look at Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. And this group of women mother what becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. So that makes them each true matriarchs. Although, spoiler, Bilhah and Zilpah were conscripted as surrogates to birth children for their mistresses, Leah and Rachel. So the actions of Rebecca, discussed in the last video, catapulted her son Jacob into the world of these women. So he has left home, literally running for his life. And he's headed to his uncle Laban's house. And this is the point where the biblical reader is first introduced to Rachel. So in Genesis 29, Jacob traveled eastward and stopped to ask a group of shepherds about his uncle Laban. They were waiting for the remaining flocks to arrive, of other shepherds coming with their flocks to arrive so they could all water their sheep together. Rachel led one of those flocks and appeared on the scene when the shepherds and Jacob were discussing her father Laban. So Rachel, the future daughter-in-law of Rebecca, was as active a matriarch as her mother-in-law, who was also her aunt. Rachel is busy shepherding her father's sheep when Jacob encounters her. This introduction is striking for many reasons. Shepherding in the Bible is a powerful and dominant metaphor for leading the people of Israel as a civil and religious leader, meaning as a monarch or as a prophet, and for God's own care of God's people. So Rachel actually represents a lot here when she comes on the scene as a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel coming, he attempted to send the other shepherds away. They refused, replying that's just not what they did. They had a routine. They wouldn't water their flocks until later. Nevertheless, when Rachel arrived, Jacob jumped into action, uncovered the well, and watered the flocks she brought with her. These were the flocks of her father, Laban. So the shepherds that Jacob had been in conversation with, who were waiting to water their flocks together, are not mentioned again. Jacob apparently watered Laban's sheep, who Rachel was shepherding. He watered them without the other shepherds. So following this, Jacob kissed Rachel and wept. Rachel originally had arrived unaccompanied, except by sheep, intending to interact with the other male shepherds. Fun fact, at least I think it's fun. The stereotype of biblical women being confined to the home, to women's company, avoiding the public sphere and the company of unrelated men, falls on its face with the introduction of Rachel in the Bible. If we are looking for examples of biblical women to model our lives after, remember that there are women in the Bible like Rachel. She's not perfect, as we will see, but she didn't shy away from things like this situation, which was just doing her job and interacting with her colleagues, even when those colleagues were men. There was no Billy Graham rule at play here. She was just doing her job. So we'll be looking at several women and different situations as we go through their shared story. I would encourage each of you to see if you fit in any of these situations. We are starting with Rachel. So at this point, Rachel had a job. She was a shepherdess, and she was trusted to do it, implying that she was both competent and independent. It sounds like a good place to be to me, although we don't really know at this point what Rachel wants out of life. Do you relate? Have you ever been there? Competent, independent, but maybe wanting something more or something else. Or, since we don't know Rachel's thoughts on her situation at this point, maybe she loved where she was at. Have you had that period of time where you were feeling good about life and your role in it? Whatever Rachel thought about her situation, her life was about to change. Instead of arriving to her familiar cohort of shepherds, Rachel is instead confronted with a weeping, unknown man. This man first watered her sheep and then kissed her. It was not until after this kiss that Jacob revealed who he was. I mean, that's gutsy. Even considering the standard cultural practices of the era, for example, Laban later embraced and kissed Jacob in welcome, which we don't really do today. This greeting is still quite an introduction to a previously unknown relative. So that's Rachel and Jacob's meet cute, right? So it's that funny but sweet part of the romantic comedy where the couple meet by like tripping and falling into each other or fighting over something or having a terrible blind date or whatever. Jacob basically just falls all over himself when he meets Rachel. And this is where they start to get to know each other. I mean, like any good rom-com, the complications will set in quickly. But at this point, Jacob falls, and he falls hard. So if you remember, Jacob's dad, who was Isaac, was totally in love with Jacob's mom, Rebecca, and it seems that romantic gene runs in the family. Jacob is in love with Rachel, and he wants to marry her. This is not really a happily ever after kind of story, though. So Jacob's father-in-law does not turn out to be full of integrity. And through a series of intentionally deceiving events orchestrated by Laban, the uncle, Jacob became married to two sisters. First, the older sister, and then the sister he was in love with, who was Rachel. So it's important to recognize at this point, just a little break right here, it's important to recognize that while polygamy later became unlawful, that's not an issue at this time and in this context. I mean, it seems like an issue to me, but it would have been acceptable social behavior at that point. They wouldn't have gotten a lifetime sister-wives special or anything. Their arrangement was too commonplace. It did turn out to be dramatic enough for its own special, but it was still commonplace. So the issue is that Laban insisted Jacob marry his older daughter Leah when Jacob loved and wished to marry Rachel. Now the reason for Leah's singleness at this point in the narrative is unclear. Leah's eyes are described as either weak or as lovely, depending on the translation. So I'm thinking something like soft eyes would be an appropriate description. And she is the older of the two sisters. At this point, this is all the reader knows about Leah. Leah is not described as graceful and beautiful like Rachel is in verse 17. But even still, Leah is not described as ugly, deformed, or blind, which may have impacted her ability to marry. As the daughter of a relatively wealthy man, Leah was a desirable bride. Nothing in the canon, meaning the Bible, nothing at this point suggests that women were chosen as potential mates based on their looks alone, however much female beauty might occasionally be celebrated in the text. So Laban received Jacob into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. There is a lot of material in there on how did he manage to do that, since Jacob, who was supposed to be in love with Rachel, spends an entire night with Leah before he notices the difference. But we'll just glide over that for right now. Laban tricks Jacob and justifies his actions with the explanation that custom dictated that the older daughter be given in marriage first. So while the reason that Laban neglected to arrange a marriage for someone else to Leah prior to this is unclear, what is clear is that she was an unwanted bride for Jacob. Leah is in a horrible position. Her father has used her for his own devices. She is married to a man who does not love her as much as he loves her sister, if he loves her at all. For whatever reason, she entered into competition with her sister for Jacob's love. So as a result of this competition, she bore 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, while Rachel, like her 4 mothers before her, remained barren. What is compelling here is that God cares about Leah when no one else does, and gives her the one thing that will grant her status and standing in her androcentric society. So here's another woman and another situation. First we had Rachel, working woman shepherdess. Now there is Leah, feeling unwanted and unloved. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever found yourself in an impossible situation? Leah, who doesn't just feel unwanted, as we sometimes do, but who actually is unwanted, unloved, but she still has a hero to her story. God is still looking out for her. Leah does not turn out to be perfect either, but it's important to know that although she may feel alone, God loves her and God blessed her. Having sons would have given Leah a future at a time when she certainly didn't see one coming, because really, what kind of future is there with a guy who doesn't love you? It would also have given her standing in society when she probably started out as something of a reject, right? As the unwanted, unloved sister. This is more than like a warm, fuzzy emotion that God gifted her. God gave her very real help. Have you ever experienced real, concrete help from God? Have you ever been in a place of feeling unwanted or unloved, not sure if help is coming? Rachel, although loved by Jacob, was jealous of her sister Leah. Having sons was a big deal in that culture, and she just demanded that Jacob give her children. Jacob rightly claimed that it was God, not himself, that caused her to be childless. This is where it starts to get really messed up. This is the part we don't talk about in children's Sunday school. But at this point, Rachel pulled her servant Bilhah, who had previously been Laban's servant, into the competition, giving her to Jacob to have children. We're adults. We know what that means. We know that you have to do stuff to get pregnant and have children. Like Hagar before her, Bilhah had no voice and no option. Whatever she thought about the situation, and we don't know what she thought because it's not recorded here, she is truly voiceless. But whatever she thought about it, she had to do what her mistress decided. And in this case, that meant doing what you have to do to have children, then going through pregnancy, labor, and delivery to have them. Bilhah gave birth first to Dan and then Naphtali. Unlike Sarah and Hagar, there was no rivalry between Rachel and Bilhah, and Rachel claimed Bilhah's sons as her own. Bilhah is still on the scene, But after everything she's been through, she can't even claim her children as her own. She's around, but she can't keep her kids. So here's another woman and another situation. Bilhah only has a few verses in the Bible, but there is so much there. As we are thinking about who we might relate to, have you ever been in a spot where you had no options? Bilhah had no voice at all. Even in recorded history, we have nothing that tells us what she thought about this situation. Bilhah was being trafficked, and she had no say in the matter. As horrifying as it is, there are people in today's culture who are being treated in this way. I know the tendency is to dismiss Bilhah's situation by justifying, like saying to yourself, that's just what they did at the time. That's just the culture of the Bible. And that's true. That was the culture and that was what they did. But that has also been true of every situation of systemic oppression throughout history. It doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't make it any less felt by the people being mistreated. People tend to recognize when they're being mistreated, even those in relationships they stay in that they shouldn't stay in. They themselves might justify the bad behavior or let others justify it, but they still feel it. It feels wrong. It hurts. Mistreatment takes its toll regardless of the justification. Dismissing it doesn't make it go away. Maybe you know what I'm talking about, and you're in one of those relationships, or you've been in one of those relationships. You feel it. It takes its toll. Maybe your situation is not as extreme, but you still feel stuck where you are. Bilhah was truly powerless in this situation. Here are our questions. Have you ever been powerless? Or have you ever found yourself stuck and without options? Is this the part of the story you find yourself in? Okay, back to our Bible story. The births of Bilhah's sons intensified the conflict between the sisters, and Leah pressed her servant Zilpah, who had also previously been a servant of Laban, into surrogacy. It's the same situation for Zilpah as it was for Bilhah. No choice and no voice. Zilpah birthed Gad and Asher. Like Rachel, Leah claimed her servants' sons as her own. Zilpah is presented as another pawn in the war for Jacob's attention and affection. The battlefield for that war was the bodies of Bilhah and Zilpah. Through the sexual and reproductive occupation of their bodies, people who would be known as Israel came into being. Through the wombs of Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah, Israel's people were birthed by choice and by force. This is not a cheery story. I'm sorry. It's the Bible. Here is one more woman and one more situation. Zilpah is in the same situation as Bilhah, powerless and mistreated, trapped in an unfair situation. We started by thinking that Leah was in a bad spot as the unwanted sister, and she was. But then you consider her servant Zilpah. Here, the author and womanist Willa Gaffney points out that Zilpah is also being used, both by Leah and by Jacob. Although these relationships are completely unjust to begin with, Leah and Jacob are the ones who should be protecting Zilpah. Instead, they each use her in their own way. This feels heavy, but is this where you relate? Have you ever felt betrayed by someone who should have been looking out for you? Have you ever felt used by someone else? Leah continued in her quest to gain the favor of Jacob, using the mandrakes gifted to her by her eldest son Reuben to barter with Rachel for a night with Jacob. In case you don't know, mandrakes are a root/flower thought to have medicinal properties, and specifically relevant to this story, it was thought to make you fertile. So none of the research I did said anything like this, but I just kind of wonder in my mind if this was a flex on Rachel, right? Like, here, sister who can't get pregnant, you'd better take this fertility drug. You obviously need it more than I do. All I need is a night alone with our husband. So I don't know. I don't know why she had to barter for a night with her husband. I really don't know what was going on, just that clearly something was going on here this time around. So this bartered night resulted in her son, the son of Leah, named Issachar. Leah later birthed both Zebulun and Dinah, a girl, with no mention of bartering for nights with Jacob. Although Jacob does not love Leah like he loves Rachel, he is still clearly willing to sleep with her, as he did with Bilhah and with Zilpah. It is not until after all of these children that Rachel finally conceived and birthed a son, Joseph. So it might be tempting to see Rachel as the bad guy here. After all, she is the loved, beautiful sister, the kind of girl everyone loves to hate, right? She also behaved badly in demanding sons from Jacob and in trafficking Bilhah. It's a big one. However, we should remember that although she was previously the independent shepherdess, at this point, she has basically been sold off by her father, forced to share a husband with her fertile sister, and has become the archetypal barren woman longing for children. That's a rough transition and not a place anyone wants to be, even today. So after everyone else has had children, even people who maybe shouldn't have been forced to have them, after everyone else has had them, and after she has had a front row seat to watching everyone else have them, Rachel finally had a son. And so, although much of this narrative has revolved around childbirth, for the first time, all of the women involved are birth mothers. So after some conflict between their shared husband Jacob and their father Laban, Rachel and Leah joined Jacob in his return to the land of Canaan. So this is a little bit of a detour, but an interesting event took place involving Rachel as the family was departing. Rachel secretly decided to take her father's household gods. We're not totally sure what they were, what gods they were, what they represented, what materials. We don't know a lot about those. But it is clear prior to this action that both Rachel and Leah feel they have been unfairly treated by their father, claiming together that he has sold us and he's been using up the money given for us. That's what they said about their dad. Perhaps Rachel felt she was owed these gods. One author claims that Rachel believes that the household gods, whatever their precise meaning, are hers by right. By the time Laban caught up with her family and began to search Rachel's tents for these gods, Rachel had hidden them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. She kept them concealed by saying to her father, "Let my Lord not be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So, very sneaky Rachel. No man wants to mess with a woman's period, not even a man like her dad. So this part gets interesting because there is a possible double meaning in Rachel's words. So Rachel said, "I cannot rise or stand before you." This could be connected with the cultural practice of standing before one's adversary or accuser. And as a woman, Rachel would not have had this right. Therefore, she cannot stand before Laban to make her case as a man would. This an inability to stand before her father leads to the additional double meaning of the way of the women. A surface reading of this phrase implies menstruation, a reasonable excuse for not standing, especially at that time and the hygiene products they had available. However, as she is deprived of standing before her accuser, which could be equated with the way of men, she resorts to cunning, using what is available to her, which is her period, to effect her will. She follows in her mother-in-law's footsteps, some here, if you remember from our last video. This subversive yet clever manipulation of the situation then could be considered the way of the women. Just as a side note, for today's reader, this portion of Rachel's story may appear tainted by her loyalty to any gods other than the true God of what will become Israel, which would have been her descendants. However, it is important to remember the 10 Commandments haven't been given yet, and she lived in a world before any of those rules, any of those religious rules against household gods were made, and she lived as a daughter who was raised in the tradition of those very same gods. So with those religious prohibitions not yet in place, Rachel's agency in this narrative can be admired as a woman righting a wrong against herself. Here, that independent shepherdess part of Rachel's personality emerges again. So the narrative in the Bible then continues without these women, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, and it includes travels and tragedy, conflict with the people of the land, and it was not until after all of this, as the family later journeyed from Bethel to Ephrath, that Rachel experienced severe labor, did give birth to her son, but then died quickly after giving birth. She had named her son Benoni, but Jacob named him Benjamin. So now we collectively have one daughter and all of the 12 sons who will become the nation of Israel. But it cost Rachel her life to give birth to that youngest son. This is not a happy storybook ending for Rachel, in spite of her meet cute with Jacob. But her mothering story continues. In later biblical tradition, ironically, Rachel, who experienced great struggle with fertility, assumes a larger role than any individual mother, becoming the mother of all Israel who weeps for her children when they go into exile. Her voice rises from the dead to cry on behalf of her exiled children. Likewise, Leah doesn't get the fairy tale ending, but she does end well. We read that later in Genesis 49:31, Leah's death is reported. She, not Rachel, is buried with Sarah, Abraham, Rebekah, and Isaac. In death, if not in life, Leah is finally accorded the dignity of a matriarch. We have no record of Bilhah and Zilpah's deaths. They are not mentioned again once their reproductive work is completed. So in death as well as in life, they remain voiceless. Although their children would have been adopted out without their consent, as they had no choice in the matter, I think we can assume they were somewhat open adoptions. They would have remained in the same settlement, servants to the same women as before, and possibly carried out a lot of the childcare responsibilities. So although they did not have a voice or the protections that Rachel and Leah would have had, I personally hope that they were proud of their sons and proud of the part that they had in birthing and raising them. They had no voice and no options. They were still truly matriarchs. So, how do these women compare with the ideal of motherhood society promotes today? How do they compare with that ideal of the perfect mom that many of us carry around in our heads? In some ways, they line up. Both Leah and Rachel prioritize becoming mothers. However, Leah's motivation does seem to be not to become a mother, but rather to win Jacob's love. Leah's relationship with Jacob indicates that loveless marriages, man-sharing, jealousy, and competition are not just contemporary issues. There is no happy ending for Leah. She is not fulfilled as a person or as a woman in motherhood. She is not the last woman to go to her grave longing for the love of a man who does not love her, but is willing to sleep with her. Jacob may not have loved Leah, but God did. She is also granted matriarch status. Bilhah and Zilpah are likewise unloved and used as pawns in someone else's competition. They both represent the woman who has had more than one abusive relationship, the woman who has been raped by more than one perpetrator, the woman who has been betrayed by women and men, the woman who has never known anyone to value her for more than what they think about her body, in part or the whole. And they represent the woman who survives her abuse. Although often overlooked, they are both also mothers of Israel. They can be recognized and respected as the noble matriarchs that they were. While each of these women are examples of mothers in the Bible, their life stories do not comfortably fit within the bounds of today's traditional motherhood. These bounds are just not broad enough to incorporate the unloved, the abused, the powerless, or the women who cannot keep their children. Rachel, the only woman in this story with the love of Jacob, longs for children she is unable to have, leading to unhappiness, discord with her husband, and ugly competition with the other women involved. At the same time, she is introduced as a shepherdess, demonstrating independence and leadership. Rachel is going to do her own thing. The traditional motherhood ideal, the idea of the perfect mom we carry around in our heads and which moms today so often try to live up to, it is not true to life. Women in these situations carry the burden of unrealistic motherhood expectations without the flexibility needed to accommodate their life situations. I don't know if or where you saw yourself in today's story, but chances are that traditional motherhood ideal is not true to life for you either. I know it isn't for me. These women don't fit. They don't live up to the expectations. They don't need to, by the way. And these women are a mess, especially during their childbirth years. But there's hope. God not only frees us from others' expectations, God also works in messy families and messy situations. God works in messy lives. This seems to be the theme of the entire Bible. It's certainly been the theme of the mothers we've looked at so far. Sarah, Hagar, Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, Zilpah. Where did you relate? Are you among this list of women with real life struggles, real life ambitions, real life joys, and real life messes? Although we've been talking about biblical matriarchs, which we are not, we in this group are the moms, right? We are the moms in our families, we're the moms in our churches, we're the moms in our community. But our lives don't fit in the traditional forms either. Maybe others see us strictly as mom, but how do you see yourself? Do you have Rachel's shepherdess leadership? Or the other side of Rachel, are you filled with longing for something, like Rachel was filled with longing for children? Are you looking for love, like Leah did? Do you feel powerless or stuck like Bilhah? Or have you been betrayed and used by others, like Zilpah? Their lives and their family, they were a mess. Is your life or family a mess? Or are parts of it a mess? Rachel is symbolically represented as the mother of Israel crying for her lost children, who are the Israelite exiles. I don't know how much you know about Old Testament history, so I'll give you a spoiler. In the end, the exiles come home. Rachel is comforted and the mess is made right. These women were each exiled in their own way, and by that I mean that they each had their struggles, and God brought them home, meaning that God redeemed their messes. Leah is loved by God. Bilhah and Zilpah survived their betrayal and their abuse. Their children were treated as the literal princes that they were, and the exiles came home. It wasn't fast and it wasn't easy. There were no magic shortcuts, but look what God did with that mess. Wherever you are, whatever your mess might be, turn to God. God sees you like God saw and understood Leah, and God can handle it. God is in it for the long haul, and God loves you. Cry like Rachel cried for the exiles if you need to, but you, wherever you are, come home. Turn to God and come home. We're going to close by reflecting on where you feel you are in exile, or what you feel the messes and struggles are in your life. Say a prayer asking God to bring you home. Ask God to redeem and work in your situation, whatever it may be. Let's pray. God, thank you for this messed up story in the Bible. Thank you that the history you saved for us is not picture perfect, but instead reflects real life. Thank you for working in and through real life. We ask that you work in and through our lives, no matter how perfect our lives are or are not, no matter if we are dealing with things that are a mess or not. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for loving us. And thank you for bringing us home. Please help us on our journey home. In Jesus' name, amen.